But perhaps you could tell us, what is the End Street Sleeping Collaboration, why it was set up, what are the targets, how are we addressing the issues, and who's involved?
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, look, quite simply, it's in the title, End Street Sleeping. So our goal is to end rough sleeping throughout New South Wales. And I have to give credit to the Premier. We originally were trying to do Sydney, and the Premier said, no, if we're going to do this, let's do all of New South Wales. So we were set up to help try and bring the government together, the community sector together, and also the wider community, so businesses, individuals, to come together to tackle street sleeping and their problem in their local areas. The target was a 25% reduction in the City of Sydney, which has been achieved. And the next target is a 50% reduction in street sleeping across New South Wales by 2025, which by working together, we will meet and achieve. And that will change the lives of so many people. We targeted street sleeping, rough sleeping, because people on the streets die much earlier than the general population. They have worse health outcomes, and they're also more likely to be victims of violence. So it's not acceptable that we have people in our place like New South Wales sleeping on the streets, and everyone came together and agreed that. In terms of involvement, we have a long list of agencies that are involved, and because of time, I won't run through them. But I do want to acknowledge that CatholicCare, DCJ, and Vinnes, who are on the call, the two speakers and yourself, have been involved in the formation of that. And that's, as we've gone along, we've brought more and more people on. So there's the quick summation, Jonathan. We're here to end street sleeping. We're pleased that we helped negotiate an international agreement with the IGH New South Wales government, adopted as a Premier's target.
Excellent. So very quickly, Graham, I understand IGH being the Institute of Global Homelessness, and that Sydney is a vanguard city and New South Wales is a vanguard state in that program. In 100 words or less, could you describe the methodology that you're implementing to address street sleeping?
One of the first things we're doing is we bring together people from all walks of life. So we bring together people with lived experience, people working in services, but also people outside the specialist homeless sector as well, people involved in disability, all sorts of areas, bring them together. Secondly, we get to know every single person who's sleeping on the streets by name. So we create what's called a by name list. The next thing is we ask those people to share their story with us, and we try and capture as much of that in a tool using the VIS for DAT, which is the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance tool. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that information shared, which is quite detailed, can be shared with people who are trying to help them on the homelessness journey, so they're not having to share information over and over and over again. We also use that information to bring together groups such as Penny and Brett come together, and we'll use some of that information with their own insights and experience to get people out of chronic homelessness. So we start with those who are most vulnerable, those who've been homeless longer, and we want to get them out of the system, because if we do that, we'll change the system. So that's called, and then we want to go upstream using information and what they call turn off the taps, which is actually stop people falling into homelessness. And some of those are difficult and long-term things. Some of them are quite simple changes and fixes, and particularly around things like prison exit planning, health system planning. They can all be done, have been done in the US, in the UK, in other areas quite successfully.
And I guess that's the advantage of being part of an international collaboration. You're also bringing those proven methodologies from other jurisdictions in and adapting them for our culture. I'll stop you there, Graham. That was excellent, short presentation. I'll come across to Penny. Thank you for joining us today, Penny. Graham was talking about the targets that have been set and the commitment to halve street sleeping. Where are we in terms of meeting that target, and how has COVID impacted that target, particularly in Sydney, where we're experiencing a very tight lockdown?
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Graham. Yes, look, in short, New South Wales is tracking well towards addressing the target, particularly in the inner city. I'm really pleased that We are on track to meet the 50% target by 2025. We've achieved 37% reduction currently, and that's a really good outcome from the collaborative efforts that happen on the street. In my team, we've established a housing assistance team that goes out on the streets, and we work very closely with our local homelessness partners and health services to provide that wraparound support to people and to offer them alternatives alternative pathways off the street. You may remember, everyone may remember the Martin Place tent city in 2017. So much effort's gone in since that time to make a difference. I'm really pleased to be able to say since that March 2017 time, we've housed more than 1,000 people who were formerly sleeping rough. That's a significant achievement, and that is how we're going to achieve the Premier's target, by keeping that focus on those activities. Across the state, we've also been able to establish assertive outreach teams in Tweed Heads and Newcastle, and we're also doing broadly assertive outreach in all areas across the state. So that is a significant change since the commencement of the Premier's target. And the End Street Sleeping Collaboration has definitely been working closely with DCJ and its housing and its partners to make all of that work. The impact of COVID has been quite significant. As we've been making steady progress, it's meant that historically we've been seeing more people coming onto the streets. People who have never wanted to access temporary accommodation or supports are now starting to take up those offers. So last year we saw a significant rise in the number of people who took up the offer of temporary accommodation to be off the streets and to be safe. And we were able to wrap a lot of support around them. And we had some additional housing responses. We had Together Home program announced by the New South Wales government, which enabled housing and support, additional housing and support to be arranged. We established a task force in the inner city to really focus our efforts on how we support people. And we worked in areas like setting up more assertive outreach, pop-up COVID testing, which we've now jumped off into a lot of vaccination happening. The health referral pathways. We had focused support for Aboriginal people sleeping rough. We looked at food distribution, and even pet care. So we really looked broadly at how we could support people sleeping rough. With the new Delta strain, last year's efforts have really meant we've known how to come in really quickly and act quickly and support people well. I think all credit to our partner agencies. I think we're doing a very good effort towards making those people be safe and feel safe. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Penny. Again, and thanks for the brevity of what is a large story there. I'll jump over to Brett now. Brett, we talked about, Graham had talked about the methodology for the approach to ending street sleeping. A lot of that also relies heavily on data. And from the data being gathered, what are the rough sleepers telling you about their journeys into homelessness, and how is this data being used to help the most vulnerable? And can you give us an example of that so that we can understand that pathway?
Jonathan, the data is telling us and confirming what we had already experienced within our services and individually. But the people that are rough sleeping tend to be on the streets for 2 years or more. The majority of the people that the collaboration have assessed, and there's up to 1,050 to date. Majority had been on the streets for over 2 years or more. There was quite high levels of mental health and physical health issues, mental health, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and anxiety. And a lot of that too could have been exacerbated by violence or experiences of being on the street. The other the other area the data told us was around the use of the high levels of drug and alcohol use. So quite high levels of substance use within this client cohort. What the data has told us, the data has told us that it's not just housing that these individuals need. It is a wraparound support. So we're able to work with the information received. The good thing about the data from the collaboration, Graham touched upon it, it's using the VI SPDAT and the by name list. For the first time ever, we're getting a 360 view of the client or of the individual and seeing what their needs are. So you may have a client, traditionally a client will turn up at one service, that one service will do their best to see what that need is and to assist that person into housing. What we're seeing now is that that client may become disengaged or fall through the cracks. So with the VI SPDAT, the by name list, all services that are signed up, we have the one source of truth on that individual. So we're able to link into other services, link in. One service may specifically be doing the housing application, another one may be doing the mental health support, linking into NDIA supports. So it's created, I guess, a comprehensive view of the support needs of that individual.
So can I play that back to you so I understand? That means that the person who's experiencing homelessness, all of the services now are having a single view on that person. So whether they go to St. Canis's for lunch, or they're staying at Matthew Talbot overnight, or they've gone into the Woolloomooloo health clinic, those services will now have access to a full view of what that person experiencing homelessness, their needs at this time. And then that data is collated back up to look at systems change.
So one of the benefits of the collaboration has been bringing us all together and working out why did the clients fall through the gaps? Where has the service system either failed them or put in barriers and challenges that as an individual service provider, you can't navigate? So having Penny and her team from DCJ sitting on around the table, it really makes it quite easy to go certain clients have been, may have issues accessing or their live applications for a Department of Housing as an example. They could fall through the gaps, or for some reason they haven't been contacted or haven't responded to a letter. We're able to work with Penny and her team to have the application reinstated. So then which means that the priority housing is sourced, and then while that's being sourced, the homeless services or mental health services are able to provide that support to that individual.
The other day when we met as a group to talk about today's session, we also talked about a committee that was formed to look at the data coming out of the first by name list data collection of the most vulnerable cohort. Could you talk us through, I understand that the focus was on the top 10 most vulnerable, and there were a couple of cases in there where there was that you could talk to us about, maybe pick one of those and tell us what happened to that individual through this process.
Okay, so through the by name list, we were able to identify the 10 most vulnerable and at risk rough sleepers within the inner city. With the information received, these clients may not have lasted another winter if they were out on the streets. So we were able to target those clients succinctly, find out what supports they were needed to support them to get them into housing and to keep them in housing. One lady in particular, due to the impact of domestic family violence, had been on the streets for quite a while. The housing application had fallen off the radar, and the lady had just, due to experiences, had refused to engage with different services, so we couldn't provide the ongoing support. What we were able to do, working with particularly a outreach service that this lady trusted, they were the primary contact, and through that, the individual was able to reinstate the housing application, was successful in housing, moved into the housing with ongoing support. Now she's with her daughter, and the daughter was pregnant, so she's now a grandmother, family reconnection, and all the families being supported.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Brett. I'm just going to quickly pop to some questions. we have our first question is asks, how do you quantify the number of people sleeping rough, and by extension, if targets are being met?
That's a really good question. So there are a number of metrics we're using. The ABS data is one. The street counts that have been conducted in the city for many years, but also have been conducted across New South Wales. And as we get the by name list used by more and more services, we're able to actually also get a real-time snapshot of the number of people. So ABS gives us a snapshot every 4 years. Street count gives a snapshot every 6 months in Sydney and 6 to 12 months COVID dependent in other areas. And as we bring up, once we get 90% of services using the by name list, we'll actually have immediate real-time data and be able to say, today there are, plus or minus a little bit, this many individuals sleeping on the streets in this locality.
Okay, and the targets being met, we spoke about that earlier, Penny. So we have met our targets for Sydney, and we've met our first target for New South Wales.
That's right. So we do use the census data, and for the inner city, the reduction is, as I said, it's now 37% against the 2016 census information. But as we know, census information becomes old, and so that's where the street count data fills that in, and we get a sense of how we're going. So we do use the census data, but the street counts is that rich element of information. We've got street counts happening across the state now, and particularly in the inner city, they're very thorough. The statewide reduction's 13% on the 2020 street count, so its trajectory is going up.
Okay. I have another question. Perhaps, Penny, you could take this one as it refers to Sydney and New South Wales. So just request approximate stats on street sleeping as a proportion of the homeless, and also Sydney versus the rest of New South Wales.
Or not sure I can answer that with good stats, unfortunately, but we know that people sleeping rough are a large proportion of people who are homeless, but then there are also those people who are couch surfers, and that's a very common form of homelessness where people go between houses, and particularly for women escaping domestic and family violence, they'll often go and stay at other family and friends and just move around a lot. So I can't tell you a proportion, but the 2016 census had 2,600 people living who were identified as homeless on the night of the census across the state. The street count in February 2021 counted 1,141 people who were sleeping rough across the state. So that number is showing it's coming down. Hopefully we're on that right trajectory to keep that coming down. Excellent. Sorry, I can't be more specific.
No, thank you.
The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has a 2016 estimate. It's going to be out of date now, but it was 18% living in supported accommodation for the homelessness of people experiencing homelessness, and 7% sleeping on the streets.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I've got another question, which Graham, perhaps you might like to take this one. Analytics of data. Is there one body responsible? So I think this talks to the collaboration in terms of the by name list. Would you like to answer that one?
So one of the functions of the in-street sleeping collaboration is to hold that information and protect it for people, to make sure it's used in accordance with their permissions. And that is an organisation that's a not-for-profit. It's owned by community members, as in NGOs who are working in the homelessness space. Its board includes many NGOs working in the homelessness space, some peak bodies, philanthropic foundations, and also has a representative from DCJ and the Premier's department on the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Penny, I'm going to throw to you on this one because I think it speaks to where you were earlier talking about the range of homelessness. This one is specifically around women who may be homeless but end up living in abusive sexual slave type relationships included in the data. Is there a subset that specifically looks at domestic and family violence incurred homelessness?
So the census doesn't count that, and that is one of our data points. So it will only count people who are in accommodation. But the by name list will be a very functional source of counting people and their backgrounds and whether it's a domestic and family violence history that's brought them to being homeless. I think it will be a very important piece of information.
So the census will capture people who are in say, a women's refuge on the night of the census, but however, the by name list will actually capture the individual stories in terms of the trigger for homelessness, which would then highlight the domestic or family violence background. Thank you, Penny. A question for you, Brett. One of our participants has noted that halving is good, but shouldn't we strive to house everyone who wants a home? And what is the target date for that if you have one? So I'm throwing to you as the housing expert.
To house everyone, and that is the ultimate target that we would like to reach. It's not around just a house as well, it is also ensuring that there's adequate supports around that individual. So having a house is one part of the journey. What we do need to ensure is that there's adequate mental health, housing support, tenancy support, other health supports, community participation wrapped around that individual to make sure that the tenancy is maintained. Ideally, it'd be great to house everyone, and that would be the ultimate target that we would aim for. I think the 50% focusing on the rough sleepers is a really good start. Just going on the stats Graham mentioned, although 7% are HURI advised were rough sleepers do tend to take up quite a lot of the service capacity in service provision. So the idea that once you house the most vulnerable and the most complex, that will create more capacity to go upstream, as Graham mentioned, to actually turn the tap off homelessness. So not only are you housing those, but you're actually stopping people and the trauma that goes with it from becoming homeless.
Thank you, Brett. And that's a really good segue to the next question from one of our participants. And the question is just wondering when the work on turning off the taps is to begin, or has it begun already? Maybe you'd like to answer that one, Graham.
Sure. The work to turn off the taps began at the same time as the rest of the program. And there have been, so part of the international agreement is that we work to try and look at doing that. Part of the methodology is using it. But what Brett was also saying is that by focusing deliberately on the chronically homeless, those with the most complex needs and comorbidities, that changes the whole system. And there have been changes that Penny and Brett have been involved in that affect everyone. As we get better and better information, what we are also doing is using that to actually be able to go up and see what interventions work for different people and target them. Also, there's already work underway around prison exit planning. There have been changes already that have happened in health exit planning. There is changes like Together Home that Penny spoke about. So it's doing both at the same time. But as we get better and better information, we're able to do faster and faster changes upstream as well. And some of those things are simply about service practice. They're not always about legislation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That rounds up our questions for today. And I'd like to thank you again for joining us and apologise for the delay in our start, the technical issues. Graham mentioned at the beginning, CatholicCare is an initial collaborator and signatory to the Vanguard State Agreement that Graham described. CatholicCare Sydney provides financial and pro bono support to the End Street Sleeping Collaboration. And to our participants, I'd like to say there are 3 ways that you can help. With a gift or donation to support the work, or by referring the End Street Sleeping collaboration to others in your network who may be able to provide financial support, or by sharing the work with your community. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you've gained some valuable insights from our speakers. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording today from us, with the link to the website for End Street Sleeping, which will contain further information. So I'd just like to say thank you, Brett, thank you, Penny, thank you, Graham, for giving up your valuable time today. I know that you're very busy solving streets sleeping, so I'm very grateful for this time, and I thank you and I say goodbye. And thank you everybody for joining us. Goodbye.